The ballroom glowed beneath the chandeliers, every crystal catching the light like the glint of polished metals. The air smelled of cologne and champagne, mingled with the faint, waxy scent of buffed floors. It was the kind of night built to celebrate perfection. Officers in dress, blues and service whites, stood in clusters, their laughter smooth and confident, their ribbons and stars arranged in precise rows. Music drifted from a nearby quartet, soft enough not to drown out the hum of conversation. It was elegant, rehearsed, exactly what everyone expected from the U.S. Armed Forces Honor Gala in Washington, D.C. Then the doors opened. The sound was subtle, but it carried. Heads turned as a figure stepped through the entrance. She was young, late 20s maybe, and her uniform looked wrong for the occasion. The OCP fabric, faded from years of use, looked almost muted against the bright decor. Her boots were shined but worn at the edges, her sleeves neatly rolled, her bearing straight and deliberate. For a few seconds, no one spoke. It was as if the music faltered without actually stopping. Then came the whisper, the shifting glances, and the sharp tone of disbelief. Colonel Richard Holbrook noticed her first. He was tall, broad, the kind of man who carried authority like a second uniform. The ribbons across his chest gleamed like miniature trophies. His smile, wide and polished for the crowd, shifted into something colder. He turned toward her, his voice rising just enough to claim the room. He asked if she had taken a wrong turn from the motor pool. The words slipped out casual, laced with amusement, but the meaning landed like a slap. A few officers chuckled, unsure whether to join him or stay silent. The laughter spread unevenly, a ripple of discomfort disguised as politeness. Sergeant Ava Collins didn't move. She stood near the back of the room, her shoulders squared, her chin level. She didn't correct him, didn't defend herself. The metal-heavy crowd around her seemed to lean away, as though her presence broke the symmetry of their ceremony. Her silence was not weakness. It was control, the kind of quiet that belongs to someone who has seen worse things than ridicule. The chandeliers still shimmered, but something in the air had changed. Beneath the music, beneath the laughter that now sounded hollow, there was an unspoken awareness that this woman did not belong, yet somehow commanded the space anyway. The hush that followed carried both humiliation and mystery, a tension that no one could quite name, but no one could ignore. The laughter had faded, replaced by the low hum of conversation, but Ava Collins still stood in the back of the ballroom, her body still and her face unreadable. To anyone watching, she looked calm, even indifferent. But inside her mind had drifted far away from the chandeliers and champagne. She remembered the smell of dust and burning fuel, the metallic taste of adrenaline that used to fill her mouth every time she keyed the radio to call for air support. Kandahar was nothing like this polished room. The light there was harsh and colorless. The air was dry enough to sting the throat. She could still picture the ridges of sand-colored hills, the constant shimmer of heat, and the faint rumble in the distance that always meant another sortie from the A-10C Thunderbolt II circling overhead. She had been part of a tactical air control party, a JTAC assigned to direct close air support for ground units. Her job was precise, unforgiving, and invisible to most. In the middle of chaos, she had to sound calm. Every coordinate, every call sign had to be perfect. There was no room for emotion when the lives of an entire squad depended on her voice coming through the static. She learned to listen more than she spoke, to measure each word, to make silence a weapon as valuable as any rifle. There were missions that blurred together, nights lit by tracer fire, days when the air trembled with engines and the ground shook beneath artillery. She remembered one particular day when the comms had gone dark, and she had stayed on frequency, working through interference, guiding two pilots through a firestorm that nearly took her team. That was the day she earned the scar along her shoulder and the quiet respect of people who never told their stories. After that, The injury had forced her home. She had been honorably discharged, thanked politely, and then forgotten. No parade. No speech. Just a folded uniform, a few papers, and silence. She tried civilian life the way others tried new shoes, but it never fit right. She found work where she could kept to herself, and never corrected anyone who assumed she had done office duty. The OCP uniform she wore tonight was the last piece of her service she still recognized. She had washed it, pressed it, made it as sharp as she could. It was her way of remembering who she used to be. At the gala, she had come only to support her friend, a pilot receiving an award for bravery. Ava had been proud to see her succeed, proud to stand quietly in the back. But the whispers came anyway. Some men in dress blues leaned toward each other and said, "She must be reserve." A woman in a glittering gown murmured that it looked unprofessional. A younger officer laughed under his breath and said she must have wandered in by mistake. She heard every word but gave no sign. She kept her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes steady. They didn't see what the patch on her shoulder meant. The hawk clutching a lightning bolt wasn't decorative. It belonged to a unit that didn't appear in public briefings. A team known only by its call sign. That symbol carried the story of nights spent under fire, of impossible missions, finished without credit. No one in the ballroom could imagine what that small, faded patch represented. Her stillness was not submission. It was strength. The kind that came from standing firm through fear and fire. The kind that made silence the loudest answer she could give. The string quartet played something slow and graceful. But no one was really listening anymore. The air in the ballroom had shifted like static before a storm. Colonel Richard Holbrook stood near the center. His expression sharpened into authority. The kind that fills a room, whether it is welcome or not. The laughter around him was quiet, uncertain, yet it gave him confidence. He stepped toward Sergeant Ava Collins. The heels of his shoes striking the polished floor in steady rhythm. His chest gleamed with medals, his posture wide, as if to make sure no one forgot who he was. He looked at her, then around at the guests. He wanted witnesses. His voice carried easily. Cutting through the fading music, he told her that this was not a field exercise, that the gala was an occasion of honor, tradition, and respect. He said the word respect like it belonged only to him. His tone was casual at first, the practiced arrogance of someone used to getting the last word. Then it hardened. Each sentence, a small blow. He accused her of showing up in a combat uniform as if she had misunderstood what this night meant. He said she was out of place, unprofessional, a stain on the ceremony's dignity. A few officers near the buffet tried to hide their smirks. A young Navy lieutenant whispered something about camouflage not being part of the dress code, and a few others laughed under their breath. Two civilians leaned closer to each other and murmured that she should have known better. The noise was low but poisonous, the kind of laughter that eats away at pride. The colonel fed on it, his shoulders straightening, his words louder, more cutting. Ava didn't move. She stood exactly as she had when he started, her boots together, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes fixed on a point just above his shoulder. The faint reflection of the chandelier flickered in her gaze, steady and cold. The crowd saw what they thought was submission. But it wasn't that, it was control. Years of training compressed into stillness. The kind that once kept her alive while artillery shook the ground beneath her. Holbrook demanded an answer. He asked if she understood the rules of military decorum. He leaned closer, his voice softer now but edged like a knife. He asked if she thought she was better than everyone else in the room. The space between them felt smaller with every word. The noise in the hall dimmed until even the clinking of glasses stopped. Ava finally spoke. Her voice was low, clear, and even permission to remain silent. Sire. The words slipped out with perfect discipline, but the meaning struck like a challenge. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Holbrook froze. and a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. The murmur that followed was not laughter this time, but something heavier. A confusion of shame and disbelief. Her hand trembled once, barely visible, then steadied. Her jaw tightened, a muscle flexing and relaxing as she fought to stay composed. The music had stopped altogether now, somewhere near the entrance. The doors opened again. A man in a crisp white uniform entered quietly, his ribbons gleaming against the soft light. He was a Navy officer, a lieutenant commander. He paused just inside the doorway, scanning the room, his expression unreadable but alert. He saw the colonel, saw Ava, saw the frozen faces of the crowd. He didn't move closer yet, only observed. The air felt thick enough to stop sound. Ava stood alone in her silence, and everyone else could feel the weight of it. The humiliation was complete. But under it something had shifted. The balance of the room had changed. And though no one could name it yet, the tide was beginning to turn. For a moment, the room seemed frozen in the aftermath of Ava's quiet defiance. Colonel Holbrook still stood before her, lips parted, caught between disbelief and irritation. The guests around them shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to laugh again or look away. The silence stretched until even the sound of the air conditioning seemed loud. Then, slowly, Ava reached toward the collar of her uniform. Her movement was deliberate, unhurried. Every eye followed her hand as she unclipped a small metal coin hanging by a simple chain. It was dull, silver, scratched around the edges. The kind of object that looked insignificant at first glance. She held it up briefly, then turned it over in her palm. The light caught on a single word etched into the surface: Resolute. Below it, faint but unmistakable, were a set of coordinates: 34 degrees north, 67 degrees east. Someone near the front leaned forward, squinting. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The colonel frowned, taking a half-step closer, his voice trying to sound amused, though it carried a note of unease. He asked if she was showing off a souvenir, maybe something from a surplus store. Ava didn't answer. She simply looked at the coin, her thumb brushing over the edges like someone remembering a face. The stillness of her expression made the colonel's laughter sound brittle. He pressed her again, louder now, asking what that trinket was supposed to prove. That was when another voice spoke, cutting through the tension. It came from near the entrance. Lieutenant Commander David Keller had moved closer. His white uniform caught the light as he approached, his face composed, his tone calm but sharp. He asked the colonel to repeat the coordinates. The room went silent again. Keller said them aloud, his eyes narrowing as memory filled the spaces between the numbers. Then his voice changed. Those coordinates, he said, were not random. They marked a small valley in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Operation Resolute. The words fell heavy, like lead. A few of the senior officers turned their heads sharply. They recognized the name, though few had ever heard it spoken outside of classified briefings. Holbrook tried to wave it off as coincidence, saying anyone could engrave coordinates onto a coin. But Keller didn't look away from Ava. His voice dropped lower, steady, carrying a weight that quieted every whisper in the room. He told them that he had flown close air support for that mission, years ago, that the extraction had gone wrong, that the team on the ground was surrounded and losing communication. He remembered the chaos in his headset, the static, the broken calls for help, and then he remembered the voice that broke through it all, clear and unshaken, giving exact coordinates for every airstrike. He said that voice had guided them through the night. That voice had saved every man on the ground and brought them home alive. It belonged to a JTAC, a Joint Terminal Attack Controller, embedded with the team, Sergeant Ava Collins. The crowd didn't gasp or speak. They just stared. Some exchanged uncertain glances. As if trying to reconcile the image before them, the woman in the worn OCP uniform with the one described in Keller's words. The colonel blinked, his mouth twitching as he tried to form a reply. But Keller wasn't finished. He described the mission in fragments. The radio interference that nearly got them killed, the moment their fuel was running low and they still hadn't located the team, the silence, then the sound of that single calm voice reading coordinates over the chaos. He remembered how the ground lit up with tracer fire, how the A-10C thunderbolts rolled in low and precise. Every strike was perfect, every mark on target. The ballroom felt smaller now. The chandeliers gleamed too brightly. Someone at the back whispered her name. A general who had been laughing earlier rubbed his temple and stared at the floor. Holbrook looked at the coin again. The faint engraving. The coordinates he now recognized, but wished he didn't. He realized the word Resolute wasn't a slogan. It was a code name. Keller turned toward the colonel, his eyes steady. He said the mission had been one of the most dangerous extractions in recent memory, that the reason anyone had lived to tell the story was standing right in front of them. The colonel's throat worked, but no sound came. Ava said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence had become the loudest voice in the room. The same calm that had once carried through gunfire and smoke now held an entire ballroom captive. The polished officers, the civilians in their gowns, even the arrogant colonel, all of them were beginning to understand. The woman they mocked had already proven herself on a field where respect wasn't given. It was earned in the fire and dust of Helmand, under a sky lit by tracer rounds, in a place where her steady voice had once meant the difference between life and death. No one moved. The entire ballroom had fallen into a silence so deep it felt unnatural, like the air itself was holding its breath. Every sound had disappeared: the music, the laughter, the shifting of shoes. All that remained was the faint hum of the lights and the weight of realization pressing against the room. Lieutenant Commander David Keller stood across from Sergeant Ava Collins, his jaw set, his expression unreadable. The story of Operation Resolute still hung between them, alive in the space where memory and respect met. Ava didn't speak. Her hands were still clasped in front of her, the small coin resting in her palm. Her posture had not changed, but something in her presence had. It was as if the years of silence and invisibility had condensed into a kind of quiet gravity, drawing every gaze toward her. She looked smaller in that vast room of medals and uniforms, but somehow stronger than all of them. Keller took one deliberate step forward. The sharp tap of his shoe echoed across the marble floor. His shoulders squared, his chin lifted, and then he stopped just a few feet from her. He looked at her, the way soldiers look at the flag during morning colors, without words, with reverence. Then, in a single, precise motion, he came to attention. His right hand rose, fingers flat, thumb tucked, the gesture deliberate and perfect. The sound of his sleeve brushing his uniform was soft, almost fragile. But in that moment, it filled the entire room. A Navy officer, a lieutenant commander, was saluting an enlisted Air Force sergeant. It was a gesture so simple, yet so deeply wrong by regulation, that no one could process it at first. It was not a salute to her rank. It was to her courage, to her calm under fire, to the voice that had once guided him and others through smoke and chaos in a distant valley half a world away. A murmur passed through the crowd like a ripple. The colonel's face drained of color, his lips parted, but no sound came. His eyes darted between Keller and Ava, as if searching for a way to undo the moment. But the room had already moved beyond him. The air itself seemed to change, growing warmer, heavier, filled with something unspoken but undeniable. Then it happened again. Another sound, a chair sliding back. A brigadier general near the front row stood, straightened his jacket, and raised his own hand in salute. Then a rear admiral followed, one by one. Others began to rise. Marines, airmen, sailor, soldiers, rows of officers in decorated uniforms standing tall, their hands rising in perfect unison. The sound of dozens of sleeves moving through the air was like a slow wave rolling through the room. Even the civilians began to understand. They stood too, not saluting, but with their hands at their sides, heads slightly bowed. The chandeliers shimmered above them, casting, shifting reflections across faces wet with tears. It was no longer about rank, nor service branch, nor protocol. It was about recognition. It was about humility. The colonel stood last. His medals glinted under the light, suddenly feeling heavy and meaningless. Slowly, almost painfully, he raised his own hand to his brow. It was not the crisp salute of habit. It trembled, held in place longer than necessary. The gesture of a man admitting his failure in the only language he had left. Ava didn't move. She didn't return the salutes. Her training told her not to. Her heart told her she couldn't. Her eyes shimmered, though no tear fell. She simply stood there. Her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and humility. The same calm that had carried her through fire and loss now held her still in this strange, sacred quiet. No one clapped. Not yet. The silence was too heavy, too meaningful to break. The only sound was the faint creak of leather shoes and the quiet hum of the air above them. It was a silence that spoke louder than applause ever could. A silence that erased the laughter and judgment that had filled the hall before. In that moment, Sergeant Ava Collins was not the woman in the wrong uniform. She was the voice that had saved lives. The steady presence that had outlasted fear. The salutes around her were not about military order. They were about something far older and deeper respect earned in the hardest places on earth. The salute lingered. And then, one by one, the officers lowered their hands. The sound of their movements was soft but resonant, like a quiet promise being made. The chandeliers above seemed to flicker, as if the light itself acknowledged what had just happened. The night that began with humiliation had become something else entirely, something no one in that room would ever forget. For a long moment, no one breathed. The ballroom stood suspended in perfect silence, the kind that hums just below hearing, filled with 1,000 unspoken thoughts. The light from the chandeliers shimmered against tears that no one tried to hide. Even the air felt heavier, as if holding the weight of everything that had just changed. Then, from somewhere near the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. The sound was small, uncertain. Then another joined, and another. The rhythm built slowly, like rain gathering force. Within seconds, the applause filled the hall. It rolled through the air, crashing against the marble walls, echoing under the high ceilings until it became something vast and alive. It was not polite applause. It was release, redemption, the sound of hundreds of people acknowledging that they had been wrong. Those who had mocked her now stood on their feet, clapping until their palms turned red, their voices breaking with emotion. The chandeliers trembled slightly from the vibrations above. Colonel Holbrook stood still for a moment, his face pale and eyes wet. The weight of shame bent his shoulders, stripping away the arrogance that once defined him. He stepped forward, stopping a few feet from Ava, his voice low and unsteady. He said he had been wrong, that he had forgotten what true service meant. There was no grandeur in his apology, just quiet truth. Ava looked at him, her expression calm and steady. She said softly, "We all fight our own battles. Sire, some just aren't seen." The words hung in the air like something sacred. It wasn't a rebuke. It was understanding. Grace wrapped in discipline. The colonel's eyes closed briefly, and he nodded once before stepping back. Lieutenant Commander Keller approached next, his steps slow and deliberate. The applause softened to a murmur as he extended his hand. His voice was low, almost reverent. As he thanked her for saving 12 lives that night in Helmand, Ava met his gaze with quiet humility and said, "Just doing my duty, sire." The simplicity of it broke whatever composure remained in the room. Around them, people wept openly. Officers who had once looked down on her now stood taller, as if reminded of what their uniforms were supposed to mean. The applause returned, stronger than before, thundering until the chandeliers shook. In that roar of sound, there was no rank, no branch, no divide, just honor, real, human, hard-earned honor, the kind that lives quietly in the hearts of those who serve. And that night, for the first time, the world saw it. When the applause finally faded, the ballroom exhaled as if waking from a dream. The lights dimmed, and the crowd dispersed in quiet conversation, their faces softer now, their pride humbled into something purer. Ava slipped away without a word. Outside, the city was calm. The cool night air touched her skin, carrying the faint hum of traffic from the street below. She stood beneath the marble steps, the echo of the ovation still faint in her chest. In her hand, the small challenge coin caught the glow of passing headlights. The engraving was worn but still clear. Resolute. She turned it over once, then tucked it safely back into her pocket. For the first time in a long while, she let herself smile. Small and fleeting. What had happened inside wasn't about her. It was about what she represented, the quiet strength that lives in those who serve without expecting to be seen, the courage that doesn't need an audience. She walked down the steps and disappeared into the city lights. Her boots, striking the pavement in steady rhythm, medals tarnish, uniforms fade. But some acts, carried out in silence and conviction, never do. Sometimes the greatest valor leaves no sound at all.